What's going on, everyone? Welcome in to this week's episode of the Mass Podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I serve as the territory sales manager for Mass Sales in the state of Kentucky, Indiana, up to Indianapolis, and Southern Ohio. Joining me today, Matthew DeGuano, owner of CPC Pools up in Long Island. Matthew, welcome in.
How's it going?
It's going good. It's going good. I'm early into 2025, trying to see what this year brings. We on this show, we've had some people come on to talk about building, come on to talk about retail, talking about, the whole outdoor experience. But one aspect that I feel like we haven't talked about a lot is service. And Matthew has service experience spanning basically about 4 decades. So who better to bring in than someone that has seen this industry change and has been able to evolve with it? So Matthew, to start out with, give me a little bit of a background into yourself. CPC Pools, starting that about 34 years ago. What's your background in the pool industry up until this point?
So when I was a young man, around 17 years old, I grew up. My parents got divorced. I lived in a very nice area outside of Manhattan, and I had to hustle and go to work and pay the bills. So cleaning swimming pools, I was paid by the unit per pool. The quicker I ran in the backyards, the quicker I did the pool, yet quality and quickness, speed, the more money I made. So I ended up paying for college, got a couple of degrees, came back, and I was bred to go to Wall Street. And then I said, you know what? I'm not going to Wall Street. I'm going to start my own pool company. And I started my own pool company in the spring of 1990, had 5 openings, 20 closings. 6 months later, broke even technically on paper and made a little money. And then just grew to about 500 openings and closings. And 42 years later, you and I are having a chat.
It's funny, I feel like, and this doesn't account for everyone, but a lot of people is like, well, I wasn't normally going to go into the pool industry, but here I am. And I feel like that just accounts for so many people. It's awesome to see. But with Matthew here, I want to, obviously the point of this podcast is for the listeners, you to be able to take something away of inspiration or something that you can use for application, something that, I hadn't thought of that before. A rising tide raises all ships. And if you take something away from the show that you find helpful or resourceful, then we have done our jobs and become successful. So, Matthew, we have obviously an objective here. But with servicing pools, one thing that I find interesting is going from, small scale to big time, over 22,000 pools serviced. For those companies out there that have a small service division, or, they're wanting to grow it, what would be a piece of advice that you would give to that company? Say, hey, look, that's great that you're trying to do this, but here's something you need to keep in mind.
Well, the first thing is, there's a famous phrase, it's not from me, but it's failing to plan is planning to fail.
Mhm.
So I would write down your goals and dream big. Put a 5-year plan out there. You have no pool customers, write down that you want to do 1,000. And if you want to do 1,000 in 5 years, what do you want to do in 4 years? 800. What do you want to do in 3 years? 600. What are you going to do in 200. And write it down on a real piece of paper and plan it out and then commit to it. And the second thing I'd say, it's hardcore, but it's real. Keep your word
Mhm.
and answer people back. Way back 40 years ago, you had answer machines, and I'd get a phone call while I did an 11, 12-hour day in the field, eating dinner at my desk with my bed next to me. And I'd call up the multimillionaires that have the homes around here at 9:45 at night, and they'd say, what are you doing calling me? I said, you left an answer, you left a message on my answer machine, and you need help with your pool. I apologize, but I was out working. I'm here to help you. Today, with cell phones, emails, and every other form of contact, many people choose to say, oh, I'll get back to you tomorrow. I'll get back the next day. I had a rule. If you call me today within 24 hours, and some sleeping might be in between there, that next morning, if the call's at 10 p.m. last night, you answer that person back, good or bad or indifferent, whatever it is, you keep your word and you follow through on everything you say. And as long as you do that with a client, you will blow their mind because you will stand out from the pack where people don't call you back and they don't answer their phones and they don't respond and they don't keep their word. So keep your word.
The timing might have changed. The methodology may have changed, but follow up is something that oftentimes you wouldn't think gets left by the wayside, but it does. I mean, you can be a real go-getter in the field, trying to scrounge up as much business as you can, but if you're not responding, if you're not showing that you're available, the best ability is availability. That's a statement that I live by to this day. But I'm curious, from where you were back then to now. We know the difference in technology and social media, but when it comes to servicing pools, what is something that you look at and think, yeah, this is quite drastically different in 2024, 25 than it was in 2005 or 1995?
What's different? What's improved in the service business?
I mean, it could be something for better or for worse. I mean, the way that you go about doing things, the way that you go about servicing, there's no limit to what it could be.
There are portable hand carts. There's carrying the super pump and the cartridge filter and the 50-foot hose. There's 3 or 4 different versions of battery operated huge things on carts and wheels, chargers, trickle chargers, driving them into a wall and breaking. Um, Over my 22,000, I think the best thing that ever happened is I happened to invent an item called the VAC Daddy. It's a 10-pound unit that replaces 70, 80 to 100 pounds of equipment. And then it goes back to my original principle is that if you take a VAC Daddy and put it on a commercial service truck, that day, my guys will do something, I'm just using numbers, would do 10 pulls a day with the heavy equipment, and now they're doing 14 pulls a day. So the efficiency and what's improved there, if you go to a boss, the bottom line is that truck went from $1,000 a day to $1,400 a day. Did not capex and buy a new truck. Did not spend 5 human beings for 3 weeks to train them. Anybody on this podcast that's in the pool business knows what I'm about to say. Train five human beings to prime a 50-foot hose in 3 weeks. I wasted 15 grand training guys. I only got one guy who could do it because it seems like it's rocket science, but it's not. It's hard to find people to do that. With that VAC Daddy system, you don't have to train them to prime a hose. You maximize your employee. My employees make more money. One guy was making $250 a day. Now he's making $350 a day with the VAC Daddy. And the truck went from 1,000 to 1,400. That $400 is not 400 bucks. It's 40% on every truck. I have 10 trucks. That's $4,000 more sales per day times 6 days a week times 5 or 6 months in the Long Island region. So
The only
the efficiency has improved, in my opinion, from using the old type of systems.
And that's kind of where I wanted to steer the ship next, Matthew. When it comes to efficiency, like I feel like there's this misconception that like spending less time on the job leads to more carelessness and vice versa. Like it feels like there is an automatic association that is that is brought with the two, and that's sort of something that we have to get out of the mindset that just because you're spending less time on the job doesn't mean that you are being careless or you are not attending to the things that you need to or being as efficient. It could really mean the opposite just by making sure that you optimize the way in which you're doing things like servicing routes and stuff like that. There's so many different ways that kind of go into that.
I agree with you 100%. There is a balance between speed or how quick you get in and out of the job, but you still have to do quality. So, today, if there's another note today, is today every vac head comes out of the manufacturer, not every, but 90% comes with a swivel handle. And the swivel handle, in my arrogant opinion from my younger days, is it's cheating. Because guys see a leaf on the left and they go chase that leaf and then chase that one. You're supposed to quality vacuum the entire surface of the pool back and forth. And don't just grab a leaf and move on because there's fine particles that are growing inside the nooks and crannies of a gunite pool or the vinyl pool. And you have to vacuum, even though you don't see it, the entire surface of the pool. Otherwise, down the road, your pool's going to turn green because those particles will grow and turn it to algae.
As listeners of the show know, it's all about getting some advice from the best of the best, Matthew. Uh, when you talk about people that are just now getting into service, because building is going to fluctuate. We're seeing it with the market, right? I mean, we like to predict, but we don't know what's going to happen in 2025 with building pools. Same with retail. Retail, it's never been harder to be in pool retail. One thing that remains steady, service will always be there. For the companies that are starting to realize that and transition their business model towards focusing more on service, what's sort of something, what's some advice that you would give? Like, what's something that, we talked about growing the service department, but ones that are just now getting into service, doesn't even just had to be vacuuming. Like, and this is kind of hard to really break it down, but, blanket advice here.
Blanket advice, Dalton, you're a brilliant guy in the way you observed and explained that building is a large ticket item, huge. 100,000, 200,000, 500,000, doing the yard over. I'll tell you a story in 2008 for younger guys that don't know, but in 2008, when there was a financial crisis, you know who got destroyed in the pool business January 1st? Guys that normally had 250 pools booked to build that year, they had 10. And they had millions and millions of dollars in equipment in a yard, and they couldn't survive. In my past, the 42 years in the industry, builders would normally say, I'm a builder, I make a lot of money doing this, big jobs, big money, blah, blah, blah. And they threw away service. And I would say, wait a minute, you build 150 pools a year, and if you want me to use metrics, maybe my average customer is $5,000 per 7 months. So you threw away 150 times 5,000, and you could have kept that money every single year, and you threw it away because you didn't want to do service, you only wanted to build. In 2008, after the collapse, huge builders on an island, big, big names, said, you know what? I should get back into service. So service is a constant. It feeds the foundation of the money coming into the company. The unknowns are you going to build, and it all depends on who you are. Are you going to build 20 pools this year or 30? Or are you going to build 12 if you normally built 20? What's going to happen when you lose that income? You need a stream of cash flow. Most guys in the pool business that build hate service. They hate cleaning. They hate satisfying the customer. You have to answer the phone and follow through and do what your customer wants. You have to woo them. You have to give them what they need and provide the service. And if you go around, then you get paid, and then your reputation grows because that client hangs at the country club with that other client with a pool,
They talk.
and they all complain about the pool guy. Because
Mm.
pool guys are known for not necessarily uh, following through and being very corporate. I use an old company, IBM-ish, where you only could wear a white shirt and a blue jacket. You had rules. So if you keep those rules and keep your word in the service business, you will grow because you will stand out compared to the other guys that aren't following through.
I don't care how advanced we get as a society in this industry, word of mouth will always be key because people talk. That can either be for the better or for the worse, depending on business practices. But um, I feel like and I see this with retail. A lot of my background is retail based, but I did have a hand in the service side of the family business that I come from before I went to distribution and now to the manufacturer side of things. It feels like if you don't invest in your service department or your retail side of things, you open yourself up to those headaches. Like people, I feel like a lot of the headaches are because of negligence. Like you can't half do it, in my opinion. Like, yeah, you can have 1 to 2 guys running service every now and again, but I feel like for it to really be a constant stream of revenue, it's like anything else. You have to invest in it.
I agree. You have to commit to it. And that's where you're putting your plan together and you're writing down what do you want and what do you want to do. And you build a pool and make that big chunk, and then there's a ratio that you keep in profits. But then you keep that client for the next 30 years in service. And they just keep paying you because if you do the right job, they stay with you. So that side grows. and puts in a foundation in your business. And the building, it depends on economics and also another plan and how big do you want to be in the building. But as you said, when I was younger, I always thought service was a maintenance company in New York, and then there was a builder. But I learned doing trade shows the past 5 years, marketing the VAC Daddy, the greatest, most powerful portable vacuum system on the planet, that when you say pool dealer, there are three categories below him in most cases across the United States. And those categories are retail, brick and mortar, building, and service. Where I came from, my mind thought it was just those two different things. In retail, I didn't pay attention to. But in retail, you can still compete because you're educated. And 80% of the pool owners in the United States are DIYs. They need the retail to educate them, sell them the chemicals, analyze the water, and teach them. Like, you want one more lesson for the service guy? Brush the pool. If you do this a weekly maintenance every Friday, you're at this house. Not everybody's going to brush the pool every week. Maybe you should, but minimum once every 2 weeks. I'm talking a 20 by 40, a 20-minute brush every inch of the pool, because you're ripping off the potential algae that grows. And when I go to a pool and there's straight lines and algae, and I go, "Hey Bob, did you take care of the pool and brush it properly?" He goes, "Yeah, brush the pool." I go, "Yeah, but your name is spelt, your initials. I can see straight lines. You only brushed it twice, and the rest of the pool is green, and algae doesn't grow in a straight line." So I'm going to say something rude like, "Well, I guess the guy was lying." Or, you want to be soft with everybody today, he was cheating. He was not doing his job right. And it's a fact because, again, algae does not grow in straight lines. Brush the pools, brush the pools, brush the pools.
Matthew, I'm curious. Word of mouth obviously is key. You don't get the, oh, you don't, let me rephrase. You don't see service companies marketing themselves digitally a ton, right? A lot of it's retail based, a lot of it's building based, and you might see some. I'm not saying that there's none out there, but it's far more common to see builders and retailers go to that medium of advertising, and a lot of service is word of mouth. I'm curious, and the answer may be no. Is there something that you do specifically that's not word of mouth that
No.
go to with service?
So,
Because I don't know of any. I was like, I'm curious.
right. So, there's different times. 40 years ago, there's answer machines, weren't cell phones, then Nextel and blah, blah, blah. And we moved on. Back then, when I didn't have a lot of money, I was just starting out and everything was in my basement. My trucks were there, and I grew and grew and grew. I used to advertise in what's called a penny saver, like a cheap little tiny newspaper that was inexpensive with a short little half-inch line. That was it. And the rest is and was and still is today. I don't advertise today. I don't advertise. It's word of mouth, because if you're good in the pool business, I'm jumping back again. If you keep your word and do your job properly, you will win in the end and you will get customers, because the customers, sometimes the women at the country club, I'm not being rude, they say, "My pool guy," and they're telling their friends. So they're bragging about their pool guy to their friends. And if she wears Chanel and she brags about her car, her Mercedes, and her friends, and they float in the same circles. That's how I grew. Now, today, my only advice would be, I'm not very into IT and other forms of advertising, and I've been around a long time. I kind of don't advertise. But the town Facebook or portwashington.com moms and dads talking about what happens in town with electricians and this and that, you get in there and pump that. I think that's that uh what you just said, where it's a referral. They're all talking to each other in that format now, and that's a way to go. I wouldn't spend a ton of money in ads, because even builders with ads, the builder most of the time gets his business from the landscape architect that landed the job. Do you get more building jobs and you wake up that service is the continual money after you build the pool? Keep the jobs. 150 times 5 grand is $750,000 a year that you can keep for the second, third, and fourth. And by the way, you just built another 150 to next year. That's another 750,000. Do you know how long it took me to get 150 clients growth and the builders just throw it away?
Right. One thing that we like to do on every episode is we like to introduce a mailbag question. Let the public introduce a question. Matthew, I think this is a great one that I'm going to pick for this show. What is the main mistake that you believe that a service company can make? And I feel like, based upon your responses, I think I might know your answer to this, but I want to hear to make sure.
Well, I may have already given that up, but it's brush the pools. And then the other mistake is it's a repetitive mistake. The human being that's the vacuumer or the guy taking care of the pool and the water, because you got cleaning debris on the floor, that's one thing, skimming the top another. But the circulation system, why? Ask the question. When you're alone in the backyard, I always worked alone. I didn't have two guys cleaning a pool. One guy, why is this pool 2 weeks in a row green? Oh, the chlorinator's empty. Really? Why is the chlorinator empty? Now, one of the main reasons chlorinators are empty on this pool and not on another, if it's 2-inch lines. 2-inch lines has so much water flow that within 2 days of you leaving last week, 2 to 3 days, you have dissolved all the tablets and jacked the chlorine so high for 3 days. Then it disappears and it goes down. And everything about chlorine, this might be the answer. Everything about chlorine is consistency and or the salt generator and all these other formats. When you were sick and your doctor said, take 2 antibiotics, get your level up, take one a day for 7 to 10 days. 3 days later, you're feeling better and you go out drinking. No, if you drink, it diminishes the function of the antibiotics. But the secret is the antibiotics gets a level consistent to fight the armies of the germs. And the spikes of up and down, also salts in every other system, because someone will call in and say, oh, I just have salt. Well, salt is chlorine. It produces pure chlorine on the spot. It's chlorine generator. Um, so pay attention to the whys. The pump basket was clogged. Why? Because the skimmer baskets are cracked. And your first line of defense to have water flow is your skimmer baskets. Your second line of defense is the pump basket. So if you clog the pump basket, you've taken flow from the proper, give it a number, 100% flow, and now you're at 40%. Two little broken acorns stuck inside of an impeller will take the flow rate from 100 down to 20. And if you don't have flow rate, you don't have turnover, you don't have turnover, you got a green pool. Period. Why did things happen at the job? Don't just fill the chlorinator, leave, shock it, throw outside in there, and a week later you come back, it's the same thing.
That makes sense, though. I mean, I feel like, and I don't want to go like say like because in treating water, I feel like negligence is one of the main issues. This is a little bit of more of like a specific like it's almost I don't even know what you would call it on the fly. It's almost like a systemic negligence. Like you're doing something over and over and it becomes habit, and then you're to the point to where you're constantly it's like a subconscious negligence because you're like, oh, well, I've done this for so long, and you just because you do it repetition wise doesn't mean it's always right. So it is what it is. I think that answers pretty interesting. I also thought the one thing you could say is following up. I think not on like the logistical side of servicing, but more so the interpersonal side. So I think that that's pretty interesting. Well, that is going to wrap up this week's episode of the Mass Podcast. Be sure to like, hit that subscribe button. Be sure to follow on all social media, follow on whatever streaming service you utilize. Thanks again for tuning in. Matthew, thank you for joining us, sir. Definitely some great answers. Matthew DeGuano, owner of CPC Pools up in Long Island in New York. Until then, we'll see you soon. Don't forget, a rising tide raises all ships.